Dorsey, Senior Data Architect from Denodo. She's going to talk about beyond data integration, data unification, and the rise of generative AI. Sounds very interesting.
Let's hope so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Go back to the slide. So, yes, my name is Terry Dorsey. I am an evangelist and a senior data architect at Denodo. And today we're going to talk about what I'm calling beyond data integration. And basically, we're going to talk about what generative AI is kind of pushing us all into. I've pretty much been where many of you are today, and so I'm going to try to line up some of my experiences within the industry itself, along with some of the customers that I more recently am involved with. So what we're going to talk about things are what are the things that organizations want to do, why it's so difficult, how we think about things today, and I'm going to introduce a different perspective as to how we actually moved forward when I was in industry with my previous employer, and then what achievements can look like when we follow these types of this perspective, right? So what organizations want to do today, everybody is talking about generative AI, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Some of those things have been around, and I think some previous speakers have talked about how they have been around in the past and in some instances for decades. In my personal experience, we started our initiative roughly 10 years ago. And this idea of autonomous agents and what these things actually mean from a data architecture perspective going forward. But in the interim, there are still things that organizations still need to do. We still need to do dashboarding and reporting and some types of visualization today. That demand may decrease over time, but today it's still something that's still current in our toolbox of things that we need to support. We still need to do enterprise integration and planning, application development. This drive around being data-driven and making decisions not only is, the efforts that we've tried to do in the past, but now generative AI is kind of pushing some of those things forward as well. Data exploration is becoming something more and more important, not just for data analysts, but in some instances all the way out to end users further out within the organization. And this idea of data sharing both within the organization and external to the organization, these are all initiatives that we have been trying to do for the past, in my experience, 40 years, because I've been in the industry that long. But these are initiatives that we've been trying to do for quite a long time. And I believe that generative AI is pushing some of these things to the fore. And there's a lot of overlap between what we can see and what we want to do with generative AI across some of the things that we want to do. It's just the way we go about doing them is going to change. But the initiatives are still fundamentally the same. Why is it so hard? And I think this came up in one of the roundtable discussions, a couple of those. First is this lack of availability of data for the broad consumption of data within the organization. Secondly, and I think this table here highlighted that, this mismatch between what business users want to do, how they want to work, and what IT thinks the way that they should work. And I know that that was prevalent in my organization. Some of the customers that I talked to today, it's still prevalent within their organizations as well. So it's this idea of how do we enable the business, but also keep up with technology and move things forward. There's this idea of increased cost and work, be it in resources, or be it in technology, be it in time to market, and this idea between the aims, the things that we want to do, and how we actually govern those going forward. So all of these things, we had difficulties 10, 20, 30 years ago, and we still have those challenges today, right? And so when I think about where I was 14 years ago, I was working in industry, and we were tasked with introducing artificial intelligence into our product development organization. And this was a very, very large initiative. It had the support of all the way up to the CEO, the CIO, chief product, everybody supported that project. But we were a legacy company, I think maybe 135 years now, something along those lines, with a lot of legacy, a lot of debt, and a lot of chaos in how we actually delivered information into our organization. Around that time period, around 2017, this was the beginning of a whole bunch of stuff. Like, it was enterprise architecture was brought in, the cloud was on the horizon, SAP needed to be migrated. So there were a lot of things that were on the horizon at the same time of this very, very large initiative, automation and all these types of things, because we were a manufacturing company. The pace of innovation was just kicking off. So all of these things that were on projects for pace of innovation. It was a global organization with a very, very large global footprint. So you can imagine how distributed the organization was, how distributed efforts were, particularly when you have different cultures of how people are actually working, and in this instance, how they think about flavor and taste. Right, so there was a lot going on, a lot of uncertainty. What technology is going to come in today, what decisions were going to be made tomorrow, volatility. The landscape was constantly changing. And if anybody has multiple ERP instances or SAP, you understand these year-long transitions and migrations that you have for these types of platforms and and the implications that they have within your organization. For us, we had the IP of our customers. So IP was a protection. Globalization were issues. Just a bunch of other initiatives going on within organizations. You can imagine, I'm sure that a lot of you can identify with the state of large organizations and even probably mid-sized organizations. So just a lot. And this idea of how do you actually do that? How do you have these different modes in your organization where you can move AI and things forward? How can you keep this agile way of moving forward, but also have the supportability and stability with all this change that you know is on the horizon? And so the vision for us, and remember, we had just started our wonderful enterprise architecture discipline, and there was this idea of, you know what, we've got all this debt, and let's think about the things that we don't want to do. Right? We don't want to be in these heavy, file-based transfers. We don't want to be in batch integration. We don't want to do all this customization within our systems. There are a lot of things we did not want to do when it came to how we were going to work. So we decided to design with purpose. And the side of that I'm going to talk about today is the data architecture side of that. And the vision there was that everyone can find what they need, no matter who they are, in the organization. You can share information easily, but still securely. Anybody can integrate. I mean, some things are worthy of enterprise integration, but some things, if I have a small SaaS application, I just need to move data into it, or if I need to do some type of ad hoc analytics, I don't really need a massive effort. I should be able to do that and not have to worry about having these big projects around that. And everything is compliant. And so that perspective took us back, the enterprise architecture discipline, data architecture. The question was, what are we supposed to even do, right? And so some of the things that came to mind about data architecture are, what do? We actually design models of what our enterprise looks like. We determine what these abstractions are of our enterprise, and that takes us into wholesale design principles. And if we think about how things are moving today with AI, agentic AI, and whatever else is on the horizon, there's this overlap, and there's this idea of, you know what, we need to design and be purposeful about how we actually deliver information to our consumers. And some of those principles here today, and these are foundational in my opinion, at least in my experience, and that's this idea of separating concerns. And in our particular case here, the consumption of data, the delivery of data, was a separated concern. That way we could concentrate on how you actually have to use it and what those processes were downstream. But certainly we can get our arms around how does data delivery need to look like. The second principle is abstraction. When we think about the data architect's job to model our enterprise, we could leverage that and we actually be active. And that means that we weren't in the ivory tower thinking up stuff. We were actually creating things that were usable within the enterprise. And abstraction tells us to make things simple, readable, usable, and understandable by consumers. The next is generalization. In order to get value from what you do in an organization, stuff has to be used. From a manufacturer, I would be awful to create products if people didn't buy them and if they weren't reused. And the same principle applies when it comes to data products. And the idea of generalization becomes a big deal. And then lastly, loosely coupling, separating the delivery of information from where it's actually sourced. Kind of like if I'm I was a manufacturer, we have raw materials, we make things, we would make intermediate things, and so forth. We would build off of that. And we just take these same principles into data architecture, and what we get from that is improvements in maintainability, increased reusability, the ability to scale, and further the deployment of information out into our business community. We get faster development and reduced complexity. And what that kind of looks like, if we think about what does it mean to abstract the enterprise, many organizations would all probably agree that if we were to deploy data at its source level, then that's not feasible, untenable, not supportable. You can't really get good use from it. But what we also find is that many organizations take what I'm going to call almost the opposite approach, in that we build all of these distinctive products. It's like a manufacturer that builds every single thing to order and doesn't have any idea of componentization. And we build these products and we try to support them at this very, very specific level. And within my organization, what that translated to was every time a project came along, we would have this end-to-end development. And so we would have these monoliths of development when it comes to delivery. And with that, you get inconsistent security, you get increased time, you get longer time to value, you get these long cycles, and a lot of the things that we're seeing as problems that we have in our data delivery mechanisms. Even further from that, what we were doing was we separated our organization into silos of delivery: application development, integration, analytics, artificial intelligence, were each separate pillars. So we've got siloed data, distributed data, and we've got pillars of actually who's delivering the same thing from the enterprise. And so the idea that we took from that was that we'll abstract, we'll decouple, we'll simplify, and we'll separate the concern. And what that gives us to is this idea of the abstracted enterprise, which is in line with the responsibilities of a data architect. And so what that means is, if I can abstract my enterprise, if I can secure these abstractions, if I can name them, give them whatever attributes and qualities that they need, I can get great use. And if I anchor them to the source and the target, that means I can decouple them. That means that as I change my landscape, I don't affect what happens in the blue area at the top. But I can create and ideate and innovate on top of that and not break things. And when I take it back to our artificial intelligence project, we were able to complete the development from end to end within 1 year, where we actually pitted our AI against our product developers. And they had an operational AI that they would work with, and that AI continually learned 24/7 based off of information within the enterprise. And that project lived through an SAP migration that's still going on, multi-year starts and stops, cloud migrations, and the application itself was even migrated in the cloud, and pieces of it were changed out, and the application did not break, it did not change, we did not have to rewrite anything from the data delivery perspective, and it's still being enhanced today. So what that means, if we talk about what that shows from the data architecture perspective, is that we have our enterprise systems, and they can act and change and move out independently. We have our architected products that are grounded in products that we now govern and deliver. And then we have these component products that we can now stabilize all of the investment that we've done over top of that. And so the question now, and this is where the logical data fabric fits into that. And so this means that when we decide how we're going to architect our products, we can create this product. In this case, it can be a customer, but we can actually design what that customer looks like. We can give it attributes, we can decide how it's secured, we can give it business terms and descriptions and other information that makes it rich. We can secure it not only with roles and attributes, but we can secure it based on protocols and who's actually accessing it. We can now be purposeful about how we source it, whether we need to do any transformations, whether we can pull it directly from systems, whether we can merge things that are in systems with things that are in warehouses or architected stores or in one country versus another country. We can do quality control and testing on these products to make sure that they reflect the enterprise view or definition of what that is. We can validate it, we can perform it, and we can automate that testing as we add attributes to this. So now we can have compliance and auditing around who's using it, for what, when, and what applications they're actually using it in. Security people can audit to make sure that roles or attributes have access or the proper access or masking. When we did our project, we had a third party. We were working with the IBM Watson team back in that time. And because we had the IP of our clients, they were not allowed to see formulas and things, but the material had to still be in there so that the patterns could still emerge. And we could do that on the fly. And as maybe the security of that changed, we could open that up or change that without having to change any development on that. And security could audit what those policies look like. So if I had like an employee and if I had complex like GDPR rules or things like that, I could apply them. Security can audit them or apply them, or I can distribute that responsibility out within the organization because now we're dealing with things at the business level named from the business with attributes that are coming from the business. Change control, we can do CI/CD. We can control the deployment and any dependencies because now we have that structure where we're grounded to the source and the architected products are now grounded within that layer. And most importantly, I find that the processes around how people now can consume and use these products, either for further modeling or development, or use, or even external parties being able to access them. We can now build those processes around the usage, the methodology around how, for instance, enterprise integration is supposed to be handled or application development is going to be handled. We now are in the area where we're in control of how we're actually consuming and providing information out to our user community. So we ended up with patterns in each of these areas. For application developments, we worked with a lot of third parties. They had to leverage APIs that were generated based off of our enterprise entities. We worked with enterprise integration, and they used the same. So if I had something that used a customer, everybody partook of that same object. And you could then use that object to further model things. We had specifications around how our products were to be built. And this meant that when we brought in third parties to either enhance or support the patterns, the methodologies, all those things were wrapped around how these products were then delivered. So what does that look like? So, and this is an example of the products that we built to support our AI. But once we built those products, we then leveraged them. We automated a couple of plants. We built some applications off of them and leveraged these same products. And so basically, this is what it looks like. You go in and you create the models of what these things are, like the attributes for products, an attribute for a sales order, an attribute for a customer or an inventory, as many attributes as you want, and you can extend them over time. And you can have processes around what happens when I add an attribute. Do I need to take security into consideration and things like that? So you can create these objects. And once you create these objects, you can then determine how you source them. Right, so customer, maybe I have information in Salesforce, maybe I have information off of two of my ERPs, maybe I have an MDM system, or maybe I have some archived attributes. I can source these products from anywhere within the organization, regardless of where it is. For instance, customer, there were pieces that came from MDM, from ERPs and Salesforce, as well as other applications, and some were SaaS applications as well, other than Salesforce. For instance, inventory. If I wanted to keep track of inventory, I didn't have to move inventory. For us, it was a lot of data to move. I could leave it, and I could still do processes based off of ERP across my multiple ERPs. And when I added my other instance for SAP, I just connected that in, and then now inventory is now across all of my instances. The next thing that you can do is each of these objects can now, with their security, can now be aligned based off of the policies within the organization. So for instance, we had IP, so our BOMs or bill of materials and our products had very, very strict rules around who can see what, and we can now influence those policies based on discussions with the customers and then implement them. They can be audited and now monitored as to who's accessing them. We also had like SOCs and internal controls, and this helped keep track of who was actually accessing those types of products. The next thing that we could do is we could determine how these things were related to each other, and we can actually model that. And this now comes into when I have my business users or my data scientists that now want to do modeling or exploration. Now they also understand what those relationships are, and actually when they go into model, these relationships automatically come in for them so that they can model their information more accurately within the platform itself. And so what that means is that in that logical layer, all of the management around the data and the consumption of how I want to deliver information to people is managed within that platform. My semantics, descriptions of what they are, how they're secured. I can determine what products are actually there and deployed. I can determine the protocols with where people access them. I can monitor to see who's running them, what applications are actually running them. I can put controls over whether they can run inside the company versus outside the company. I can control all of my enterprise, the abstraction of my enterprise from within that platform from a consumption basis. I can validate that. I can distribute the validation out. We had, so for instance, my product developers or that organization, they can validate now what their trial formulas to make sure that they reflect the multiple formula development systems that they actually have, so that if anybody leverages now that trial formula, they know that it has information that's reflected based on the product development organization and its idea of what something is. Some other things come out of that when you actually model and leverage it and allow the business. Now, when projects come up and you have to have discussions, now you have real discussions as to how things are structured, what information looks like. So when you bring on new applications or have to migrate out, now everybody's working off of the same piece of information as far as how things are created. And so the next step for that was we created services off of those, and our AI developers could do their work. But what we also were able to do is to provide spaces so that our business users could do what they needed to do. And so the process now becomes simpler. I can go in, I can find pieces of the enterprise that I want to work with. I can create my own views. I can have I think we also had a corporate entity that created enterprise-level views, but I, as a business user or a data scientist, can now go in, I can create my own views and models, and I can actually deliver those out. And if anybody executes them, they execute based on the privileges that are based off of the underlying objects that we've created. I also decided to govern the APIs and services that we have. And what we did was we generalized them so that we could get good reuse. So when our SAP enterprise integrations and migrations came up, we could leverage those services regardless of where. So if I had to go automate a plant, which we did, a year or two after we started our migration, I didn't have to redo my integrations because my integrations are working off my abstractions, and I'm just making sure that I plug in the right pieces within when I build my objects. And so all that works very well. From a security perspective, I can control the protocols. Like, so ODBC, pain in the neck. We decided we didn't want to deliver ODBC. We could have, but we decided everything had to go through JDBC and it had to be secured, right? So I'm smiling, right, because ODBC is such a pain, right? I could designate that all of my services had to be called through an API manager. And that way, now these APIs, people can go off and create leverage these APIs within applications and things like that. And the beauty of it is when these APIs ran, they ran based off of the user running them. So I could have like tokens, right, that it would have the identities and scopes and for those users to actually run through the security system. So I didn't have to create many APIs based off of who was going to run them or what the privileges were. And my developers didn't even need to know. So if I do application development, my third party can come in, here are the APIs you have to use, here's one for you to authenticate, here's one for the information, you go write the UI, leverage the APIs that we build. And that way, if you move out or somebody else comes in, I know that I've got APIs and I have things and my support becomes something that I can now manage. And then finally, all of this can be delivered through my identity provider so that I have wholesale security that matches other parts of my organization. Right, so I can wrap it around with attributes and roles. And then finally, I can have lay users come in, find these products, either the ones that that my organization governed or ones that were created, and they can now come in and search, execute information on these products, run queries, and I think we have natural language querying built in so that you can actually talk to these objects and it can actually run queries based off of questions. And so for us, what that meant was all of these operations that we talked about that organizations want to do or still have to do, whether we want to do them or not, now they're all sitting on my stack. If you need information, you come to the stack. If you want to do enterprise integration, you follow these patterns, you leverage these services. If you want to do planning, here's information based off of the privileges that you have in order to set up your planning environments. It used to be that we would have to go in and we have to create ELT within our warehouse and create these big files and send them over for them to ingest. Now it's on demand. So if you want to change how you model or change how things put together, if the objects are there, you can leverage them. If you need an attribute added, we can add an attribute, which is typically a quick turnaround. Or we can create an object based off of what you need if one doesn't exist. Automation, we automated a plant in the UK, a distribution center in the US. And the beauty of that was the automation we did in the UK, we could leverage those same products for the automation that we had to do here. So we were reusing because we generalized and because we abstracted. Our AI project, that's just going on, and it's moving, it's living, and we don't really have to. Only time we had to be involved is we had to create another entity that needed to exist. And some of these were external, like I don't know if I have recipes on here, but we have external attributes that we could bring in. And once we brought them in, everybody could use them. Application development, I talked about that. Data modeling, anybody with access could go in and they could create their own data models and leverage them. So if you had to do ad hoc work, you didn't have to make a big project out of it for IT to be involved in. And so what that means is when we create these products and we allow this innovation within the organization, we now make data available for all of our users because it's secured. I don't know what that means. Got it? I don't know what I'm supposed to. Okay, thank you. So now we have data available. And it was great for us because the vision was like, you know what, I can create products and I need to be consumer agnostic. And so my consumers, they can consume things over REST, GraphQL, OData, SOAP, XML, JSON, HTML, whatever they need to consume. I just need to create the one product for them to do it. It's secure as far as their consumption of it. So everybody is now a consumer, and that means AI. It also means generative AI. So it doesn't matter whether I have my orders, my deliveries, my invoices, my inventory or shipments, or any things that have been modeled based on these objects. Now, the more I create, the more access the people in my organization now have the ability to use. And so what that looks like is I have a few business use cases here, right? So I have an application developer, and that application developer is tasked with creating a chat application. And in this instance, it would provide reduced complexity and reliable real-time data for when the customer service takes calls, for instance. They can reuse the shipments, deliveries, and invoices. And they can actually create text-to-SQL applications leveraging that and leveraging an SDK that allows them to have access to that. My customer service department, if they want to ask questions, they can go directly to the Fabric, or they can use the chat app that was created that's based on the Fabric. Or if there's a report available that's leveraging it, they can do that, or they can have somebody create the visualization for it. And you start to see that there are patterns now on consumption, right? I can go into the catalog. I can have visualizations created on top of it. And if there are generative AI applications, they can do that. And this works for occasional business user. Account manager can be out at a customer site. And a customer can ask him a question, and he can get real-time information to satisfy that customer's question while he's actually at the site. A few more use cases here, because I'm behind. Data scientists. Data scientists now, this idea of entities and features is something that's natural when you have these entities that are created. And then finally, my integration developer. My integration developer can concentrate on pub-sub models or actually doing the work of messaging and moving things around and leverage services in order to augment information that has to be delivered. And so the key takeaways here are there are many initiatives within our organization. Everybody's after the same data. And the idea is if you focus on what your customers want, and that's your business community, then you can actually unlock a lot of innovation and growth within your organization. And this is based off of design principles. I didn't make them up. So these idea of abstraction and loose coupling and separation concern, they really, really work and help you to prioritize reuse and trigger growth and innovation within your organization. And a logical data fabric is a way that facilitates these design principles so that you can provide data to all. And that's all I have today. Thank you. You can go talk to the booth outside, and they would love to talk to you. Thank you.
I do have a little question. I know we're a little bit over, but I had a conversation with a leader of a big multinational bank, not recently, and it felt a lot like, depending on the requests, they would go to a different legacy system. So it sounded like different system depending on what they were doing, as well as it sounded a lot like the system were legacy in a way that is not now that you can migrate from one system to the other, and your data scientist always will be in a notebook with Python and the libraries, and like it's very friendly, but it sounded like they had to be trained in a specific environment. But it's a multinational bank, so doing a data unification and having a more unified environment, it would be very costly. So they were sort of like afraid of that cost. What would you recommend to a company that is afraid of the cost of doing something like this?
The cost from a risk perspective, or a cost from a...
For the migration and really investing in your infrastructure.
Right. So in my opinion, and I think design principles bear this out, right? This idea of abstraction, separation, these are real principles. We use them in software engineering. We use them in a lot of things, like even go to a restaurant, things are separated. These are just basic principles. I would recommend to anyone that abstraction is key to unleashing a lot of initiatives without having to worry to experience as much risk, technical debt, right? It's a way of simplifying how you actually deliver and work with information. So I personally would recommend it to anyone. When I started that AI project, I could not conceive of, I had been in BI for 10 years, I could not conceive of executing that successfully, certainly not within a year, leveraging traditional approaches to that. Now we're in this space where things are agile. You have to be able to move and shift quickly. So yep. I would recommend abstraction for anybody endeavoring on anything where it has to do with delivering information to someone.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.